Many of us know what it's like to walk into a branch of a big store such as fashion, electronics or something else, only to find that they don't have what you really want in stock. Brands and retailers can and should rethink their logistics. They must take control, and they can. Good morning.
Good morning.
Why are retailers and fashion stores running out of stock? I mean, what's the matter with their supply chain?
I think there's primarily two reasons. One is that there is a misalignment between functions, and secondly is that there is a lack of end-to-end visibility. If you look at the way that companies are organized, sometimes they even have competing objectives between different departments, and that is of course not driving a very smooth supply chain. Secondly, if you look at the visibility inside a company, often there is a lag between, there's a gap between international supply chains and the local supply chains. And many times even international supply chains are run on Excel. So the visibility only comes once the product is actually delivered into the warehouse. So these are some of the ways, or some of the, I would say, the primary reasons for companies being out of stock, and of course, often disappointing customers.
And when it comes to the international supply chain, what are some of the mega trends that are affecting it, that are disrupting it?
Yeah, I believe there's three mega trends right now. So one is around reducing complexity, the other one is around managing speed, and the third one is around driving insights. So if we look at the first one, the supply chains are becoming more and more complex, and what customers are looking for is how they can organize that more effectively, both across their estate, but also, for instance, how they source. If we look at speed, this is really around finding the right speed for your supply chain. So some customers, it's all about being fast. Others, it's all about having the right level of inventory. But actually trying to find out how we change speed, how we are more agile in the way that we respond, is one of those keys around speed. And what we focus on a lot is how do we do that seamlessly? And then the third part is around insight. We get more and more data today, and what we see customers are looking for is exactly the agility to access that, to generate new reports, and then have that insight that can drive change and that can drive profits.
Following on from the trends that you've outlined there, what impact does changing consumer demand have on the whole supply chain?
I think it has a massive impact. What we see is that the customer journey is becoming more and more complex. We want to be met as a consumer wherever we are. We want to have choice in terms of how we are being serviced. And we want to make sure that we are getting things delivered in the way that we find most optimal. So I think that complexity is driving a lot of choice. And of course, that means that we have to do a lot of decisions as to where to place our inventory. And that's not always easy.
And are there any other things, other factors that affect these complexities? And for that matter, how are retailers responding to these challenges?
So actually looking at how we can manage that as one flow and how we operate that as one flow would be a very important part.
What about change? What about the improvements? What opportunities do you see that there are to redesign, if you like, the supply chain to make it more effective, to make it work better?
I think the key is you have to start with the customer and the customer experience. What is the promise that you're giving to them? When you understand that, you work backwards. You see, how can I then use my supply chain? And I think people are today too often thinking about their supply chains as a cost. And they should actually look at it as an enabler for growth. Look at it, how can it make me closer to my customer? How can I drive customer experience? And actually, how can I drive an outcome that actually generates more sales?
Tell us a little bit more about Maersk and what you're doing to support the changes that are happening.
So what we do is that we start with what is the promise that you have made as a customer to your consumer. And then we work backwards from there, trying to understand how we would then design and create a supply chain that meets those needs. So for us, it's all about making sure that we are clear on your outcomes, and then how do we then build a supply chain that supports that.
it all sounds fine in theory, but of course there will be a skeptical CEO out there who says, yeah, but that's fine for them. You know, I have a different set of circumstances. What works in that country might not work in my country in the same way. My circumstances are very different. So how do you go about customizing your offering to meet those challenges and to meet the skeptics' demands?
Yeah. There's always a balance between what is most efficient and the individual needs of customers. And I think the best way to answer that question is that we operate some of the most complex supply chains in the world. And of course, that is a matter of balancing how you do that most effectively, but also linking to that customer individual needs. The way that we have designed our processes and tools are that they are set up for efficiency, but also in a way that we can configure to individual needs of the customer.
So we've talked a lot about the future of the supply chain,
Yeah.
and for any key decision makers who are watching this interview, what key messages would you like them to remember?
I would say be very clear about what your customer promise is and then build your supply chain strategy around that. Think your supply chain end to end, making sure that you can take and optimize the entire flow. And then lastly, make sure that your organization is built in a way that it doesn't create any barriers for a great customer experience.
And it's interesting, you mentioned their customer experience at the end, because that's how you began, that at the end of the day, for the supply chain to work effectively, that needs to be very much the focus. And it's been really interesting finding out more, and you've given us a lot to think about as well. Mikkel Rasmussen from Maersk, thank you very much.
Thank you.